So they've been driving trucks for almost 15 years now. 18 means a lot of nights alone on the road. Miles of nothing but dark highway, buzzing lights, and the hum of tires that starts to sound like whispering if you're tired enough. People think long-haul driving is peaceful, freedom, quiet, open road. But they don't talk about how easy it is to lose time out here. How the world starts folding in on itself after enough hours behind the wheel. You start seeing things twice, the same diner, the same gas pump, the same stretch of trees. Sometimes I wonder if I ever really left the last town. That night, I was hauling refrigeration units to Dallas. The dispatcher told me to take Route 47, but there was construction, long delays. My GPS suggested a detour through a smaller highway that cut right across a place I didn't recognize. It was late, maybe 2, 3 in the morning. The road was empty, and my eyelids felt like sandpaper. I figured a shortcut would save me an hour, maybe 2, so I took it. The road narrowed almost immediately. No markings, no reflective posts. Just cracked asphalt. Trees pressing in from both sides like they were leaning closer to see who was passing through. My high beams caught their shapes. Twisted branches, wet leaves, and for a while that was all there was. About 10 miles in, the GPS froze. The little arrow on the screen just stopped moving. I tapped it. Nothing. Signal lost. No big deal, I told myself. Happens all the time out here. But then I noticed something strange. There weren't any signs. Not a single one. Usually, even on back roads, you'll get some kind of marker. A speed limit, a town name, a warning for deer crossings. But there was nothing. Just trees and fog. After a few more miles, I saw a light ahead. At first, I thought it was another car. I slowed down, but it didn't move. It was steady high up, a street light. Just one. It stood alone at an intersection where 2 narrow roads met. The metal pole was rusted, the light above it yellow and weak, flickering every few seconds. I hadn't seen another light for an hour, and for some reason, the sight of it made my chest tighten. I pulled over, rolled down the window. It was quiet, not the normal kind of quiet. This was heavy. The air didn't move. No insects, no wind, no distant hum of anything living. Even the sound of my engine felt wrong, like it didn't belong there. Under the light, I could make out faded road markings and something else, a sign. It was tilted, half swallowed by weeds. The paint was almost gone, but I could just barely read it. Welcome to Stowe. That name didn't ring a bell. I'd driven through almost every town between Kansas and Texas, and I'd never heard of Stowe. Still, I figured maybe it was one of those places that doesn't show up on digital maps. I needed fuel soon anyway, so I decided to check it out. I turned right at the sign and drove down the narrow road into the dark. A few minutes later, houses appeared, or what used to be houses. Most of them looked abandoned. Boards across the windows, paint peeling in long strips. A few porch lights flickered, but the air felt too still for electricity to still be running. My radio hissed softly. I'd left it on for company, but now it was just static. I reached the dial, and for a split second, I heard something, a voice maybe, before it cut back to silence. I told myself it was just interference. Out here, signals bounce weirdly off everything. The road took me through what looked like the town center, a small square with a gas station, a diner, and a post office. Everything was closed, but the lights inside the diner were still on. I slowed down and peered through the window. As I rolled past, inside, the booths were empty. Plates still sat on the tables, old, crusted over like they'd been there for years. A jukebox stood in the corner, its front glass cracked. The neon sign over the counter flickered faintly. Open. I stopped the truck right there and killed the engine. I don't even know why. Curiosity, maybe, or exhaustion. But something about the place felt frozen, like it had been waiting for someone to notice it again. I stepped out. The air was thick and cold, smelling faintly of dust and burnt metal. My boots crunched over gravel as I crossed the street. That's when I realized something odd. Every single door on that street was slightly open, just an inch. Not wide enough to see inside, just enough to look like someone had stepped out and never came back. I told myself it was the wind, but there wasn't any wind. When I reached the diner door, I pushed it open a little more. It made a soft creak, echoing in the silence. Inside, the floor was coated with a thin layer of dust. My footprints were the first marks in it. The air smelled stale, like old grease and something sweet. Rot, maybe. I walked toward the counter. The clock on the wall had stopped at 2:17. The same time it was on my phone. I glanced down at the screen, battery half full, but no signal. Behind the counter, there was a single cup of coffee, black, cold, and next to it, a half-burnt candle. I stood there for a moment, staring at that candle. The wax had melted down one side, forming strange little ridges. And in the silence, I thought I heard something faint, a low hum, almost like electricity, coming from somewhere outside. I stepped back out onto the street. That's when I saw it again. The street light at the edge of town, glowing through fog. The same one from before. Only now, I was miles away from where I'd first seen it. I know how that sounds. Maybe there was another light. Maybe I got turned around. But the pole was bent in the same way, with the same rust pattern halfway up. I could even see the same little sticker peeling off near the base. I walked closer, trying to convince myself it wasn't possible. The light flickered once, then twice, and then it went out. For a moment, the whole street disappeared in blackness. Then it came back on again, dimmer than before. That's when I noticed the shape underneath it. Someone or something was standing there. I couldn't see much, just the outline of a person motionless, right under the glow. I thought maybe it was a local, someone coming to see what I was doing. I raised a hand, trying to show I meant no harm. "Hey there," I called. My voice sounded small. Didn't mean to trespass, just passing through. No response. The figure didn't move. It was strange. The light flickered, but the shadow didn't change. Like whoever was standing there wasn't casting one. After a few seconds, I started backing toward my truck. Every step I took made the gravel crunch louder. Too loud. The air felt thicker now, heavier. My skin itched, like something invisible was pressing close. Then, just before I reached the truck door, the light flickered again, once, twice, 3 times, and went out completely. The darkness swallowed everything. I froze. I couldn't even see my hands. Just the sound of my own breathing, fast and shaky. And then a faint pop. The sound of the bulb snapping back to life. The light came on again, buzzing softly. The space under it was empty. No figure. No movement. Nothing. But on the ground, right where it had been standing, there was a small puddle, not water. It looked darker, thicker, like oil. Maybe. I didn't go closer. I just climbed back into the truck, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely shift gears. The GPS was still frozen, but I didn't care. I just drove, for what felt like an hour, maybe more, until I saw the highway lights appear in the distance. My heart didn't stop pounding until I was back on the main road, surrounded by trucks and noise again. When I finally stopped for gas later that morning, I tried to find Stowe on the map. Nothing. No record of it online. No mention in old directories. But that wasn't what scared me most. When I got out of the truck to refuel, I noticed something on my front bumper, a small smear of black. Same color, same texture as that puddle under the light. And stuck in it, pressed flat like a leaf, was a single dead moth. Its wings were still warm. I hadn't been back to Ash Hollow in 15 years. Not since the fire. The road leading there looked almost the same, narrow, cracked, lined with dry brush that swayed like brittle bones in the wind. But something about it felt smaller now, quieter, like the world itself had swallowed its breath and was waiting for me to notice. I told myself I just wanted to see it once, to make sure it was real. The fire had taken everything. Our house, our neighbors, even the dog we'd buried in the backfield, my mother's favorite chair, my father's old truck, everything. But when you lose a place like that, it doesn't really leave you. It sits in your chest, heavy waiting, until you have no choice but to come back and face what's left. The sign at the turnoff was still there, bent, half buried in weeds. The paint had peeled so bad it just said ASH Hollow. The name fit now more than it ever did. As soon as I turned down that road, I smelled it. That smell. It hit like a memory you don't want but can't stop remembering. Sweet char would mix with something sharp, like melted plastic and rain on burned soil. It wasn't supposed to still be there. Not after all this time. Not after a decade and a half of wind and storms. But it was. The deeper I drove, the stronger it got. Like the air itself had soaked in the fire and never let it go. The trees along the hillsides were black silhouettes. Brittle stumps twisted into strange shapes, their branches long gone. Some still stood like they were frozen mid-screen. Others had fallen and sunk into dirt, half buried by ash. I remember that day too clearly. The orange sky, the way the smoke had rolled down the hills like a living thing. The sound, that awful roar, like the world tearing itself apart. And the smell, always that smell. They told us the fire started from lightning. That's what the report said. But my father never believed that. He used to sit on the porch late at night, saying there was something wrong with this land. Said it was cursed long before we built here. When I was little, I thought he meant superstition. But as I drove past the hollow, the old valley where our house used to be, I started to think maybe he was right, because there was something in the air that didn't feel natural, like the smoke wasn't from fire anymore, but from something still burning somewhere underneath. I parked the truck near what used to be our driveway. It was barely visible now, covered in dirt and weeds. The hill still sloped the same way, but everything else was gone. No fence, no porch, no mailbox, just the smell. I got out and walked. My boots sank into soft soil that looked black, but glittered faintly in the light, like shards of glass mixed with ash. The ground gave off a faint warmth. I told myself it was just the sun, but the sun was setting behind the ridge. The wind carried faint sounds, creaking, soft rustles, something that could have been branches scraping or whispering voices. It was hard to tell. I walked to where the house used to be. I knew the layout by memory. The front steps, the window where my mother used to grow her herbs, the place my father built a bench that splintered the first week because he refused to measure twice. I stood where my room would have been. All that was left was a blackened stone foundation and a patch of ground that smelled like old rain. I crouched and brushed the dirt away. Beneath it, I found something hard, a piece of glass, curved and cloudy. It took me a second to realize it was from my old bedroom window, the one I used to tape drawings to when I was a kid. I turned it over in my hand, and for a moment, the reflection in it wasn't mine. It looked like the room as it used to be, faint, blurry, almost like smoke caught inside the glass. I blinked and it was gone. That's when I heard it. A faint crack, like something shifting deep in the ground. Then another. The air felt heavier, thicker, and the smell grew stronger. It wasn't just smoke anymore. It was meat, burned flesh. I froze. That smell wasn't from the past. It was fresh. I turned, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. The wind had stopped completely. Then, somewhere behind me, I heard the faintest sound, like a breath being drawn in, long wet. I spun around. Nothing, but the ground beneath my boots trembled slightly, like something alive was moving far below. I backed away. The air shimmered faintly, like heat waves, but the evening was cold. And then, faintly I saw it, a trail of smoke rising from the dirt, twisting like it was searching for shape. It curled into the air, then bent toward me. When it touched my skin, it burned cold. I stumbled back, choking, my eyes watering. And in that haze, for just a second, I saw figures, shapes in the drifting smoke. One looked like my father, another like my mother. Their faces were blurred, but I knew the way they stood, the way their shoulders slumped, the way her hand reached out, the same way she did that day, when the fire came to the kitchen door and she yelled for me to run. I wanted to speak, to say something, but my voice came out cracked. Mom! The smoke froze midair, then folded back into itself. The figures vanished. The air went still again. The smell, though it stayed, I couldn't breathe right. The air felt heavy, oily, like breathing through wet cloth. Something deep inside me said to leave, to get back in the truck and drive away. But I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. It was like the ground wanted me there. I crouched again, I don't even know why, and touched the dirt where the smoke had risen. It was soft, almost spongy, and beneath it, warm, like embers. A faint glow pulsed below the surface, barely visible. I leaned closer. It looked like something alive under there, moving. The ground exhaled, a slow hiss, a whisper of air that brushed my face. And in that breath, I heard a voice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but I heard it, still here. I jerked back so hard I fell. My heart slammed against my ribs. The ground went quiet again, the glow fading. I stared at the spot until I realized my hands were covered in black dust. But when I looked closer, it wasn't dust. It was soot, fresh, like the fire had only just gone out. I don't remember getting back to the truck. I just remember the sound of my boots on the gravel, the feeling of my chest tightening, my breath coming too fast. When I slammed the door, my reflection in the mirror looked wrong. My eyes were darker, my face grayer. I turned the key, nothing. The truck wouldn't start. I tried again. The dashboard lights flickered, then dimmed. The smell of smoke filled the cab, stronger than before, seeping through the vents. And then I heard something inside the static of the radio. Faint, crackling, a voice. It sounded like my father's. Shouldn't have come back. I froze. The radio hissed again, then went dead. I sat there in silence, gripping the wheel until my fingers ached. The last bit of sunlight faded from the sky, and for a long moment, there was only the smell, thick, choking, like the world around me was still burning. I turned my head, and through the cracked side mirror, I saw the valley behind me glowing faintly. Thin trails of smoke rose from the ground, and if I didn't know better, I would have sworn the shapes in that smoke were walking toward me. I started the truck one last time, and this time it worked. I drove until the smell finally thinned, until the night air tasted clean again. But even now, days later, I still catch it sometimes. In my clothes, in my hair, in my dreams. Ash Hollow may be gone, but something there never stopped burning. And I think it's waiting for me to come back. I didn't plan to go back. After what happened in Ash Hollow, any sane person would have kept driving until the gas ran out. But a week later, I was still thinking about that smell, the smoke that never went away. It clung to me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with that bitter, burnt taste in my mouth, my lungs aching like I'd been breathing in fire again. That's when I started seeing the name, Ember Road. It showed up everywhere. On an old map I swore I'd thrown away. On a faded highway sign, half buried in weeds. Even in my dreams, carved into the side of a burning hill, glowing like embers under ash. I tried to ignore it, but the more I tried, the heavier it felt, like something wanted me to follow. So I did. The turnoff was 20 miles past the edge of town, down a dirt road that barely existed anymore. The trees along the sides were all dead, black trunks, no leaves, no life. The air got thicker the deeper I went, and that same smell came back. Smoke, old and sweet. Then, through the haze, I saw it. A church, perfectly intact. It stood in the middle of what looked like a wasteland. Nothing but ash and gray dirt stretching for miles. But the church looked untouched. White walls, a tall steeple. Windows so clean they almost shimmered. It made no sense. I parked the truck on the road and stepped out. The air was silent. No birds, no wind, just that faint hum, like the air itself was holding its breath. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. Footprints in the ash leading to the door. Small ones, bare feet. They looked recent. The church doors were closed but unlocked. They creaked softly when I pushed them open. Inside, everything looked new. The pews were lined neatly. The floorboard shined. Sunlight came through the stained glass windows, painting soft colors across the room. And at the front, rows of candles burned in silence. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Each one flickered softly, glowing a pale orange. But none of them were melting. Not a drop of wax anywhere. I walked closer. The air smelled like smoke and melted honey. The flames bent slightly, as if moving to watch me. Then I noticed something worse. The candles were different heights. Some tall, some nearly gone, but every single wick burned with the exact same flame. I should have turned around right then, but I didn't. There was a book on the altar, old leather, cracked but clean. When I opened it, the pages were blank, except for the first one. It said, "Every fire remembers its name." My throat went dry. I didn't know why, but I felt like those words were meant for me. The air in the church shifted, warm 1 second, freezing the next. The candlelight started to dim, then flare brighter. The longer I stared, the more it felt like the walls were breathing. I turned, scanning the pews, and that's when I saw her, a woman sitting in the back row. She wasn't there when I came in. Her clothes looked old, like something from another century. A dark dress, sleeves down to her wrists. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, and her skin looked like paper, pale, almost gray. She was staring at the candles. I froze. My voice cracked when I spoke. Are you okay?" She didn't look up. I took a step closer. That's when I noticed the ash around her feet. It was darker, like it had soaked up something wet. I stepped back. "Do you live here?" She turned her head slowly, like she hadn't moved in years. Her eyes were dark, not brown or black, just dark. "Empty. This isn't a place for the living," she said. Her voice didn't echo. It just hung there, heavy, like smoke trapped under ceiling. "I didn't mean to intrude," I said. She lifted a hand and pointed toward the altar. "Do you know which one is yours?" I followed her finger. The candles. There were hundreds of them, small flames flickering silently. My mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" She smiled, slow and sad. "Everyone has one." I stared at the flames, my heart pounding. They looked identical. But somehow I could feel one of them pulling at me. A small candle near the center. Its flame trembled faintly, the only one that moved. I don't know why, but I stepped closer. The moment I did, the heat around me changed. It wasn't from the candles. It came from inside my chest, rising up like I was about to burst into flame myself. The woman's voice came again. "That one knows you." I reached out, almost in a trance. As my fingers neared the flame, the air around it rippled. The wick burned brighter, white hot, and for an instant, I saw something in it, a reflection. Me, sitting in my truck, asleep, but outside the window, something dark was watching me. The flame flickered, and the image was gone. I pulled my hand back fast. The woman stood now, still pointing. "If you leave it," she said softly, "it will follow." "What will?" I asked. Her eyes drifted to the door. "The fire that remembers." I turned, and the church seemed darker now. The sunlight through the windows had faded. Even though it was still early, shadows crawled across the floor like they had weight. When I looked back at her, she was gone. The pew was empty. The ash where she'd been sitting was gone too. I ran to the door, my breath shaking. But when I pushed it open, it wasn't daylight outside anymore. The world was gray. The sky looked heavy, full of smoke. The road, the truck, everything, covered in a layer of ash that hadn't been there before. And behind me, the church bells began to ring. Low, slow. Each sound echoed like thunder rolling across a dead valley. I turned back. The candles inside flared at once, blindingly bright. For a second, I saw faces in the flames. Dozens of them, twisting, screaming, their mouths open but silent. I stumbled down the steps, ash rising around me like snow. My boots sank into it, deep enough that it felt like I was walking through dust that used to be people. The bells stopped. The air went still again. When I reached the truck, the windows were fogged from the inside. My reflection looked wrong, pale, hollow-eyed. I turned the key. The engine started, but the radio came on by itself, whispering static. And beneath that static, I heard her voice again. Soft, almost kind. "You shouldn't have left it burning." I looked in the rearview mirror. The church door was open now. Smoke poured out slowly, curling into the sky. and inside that smoke, something glowed, one single, flickering light that wouldn't go out. I drove, fast. I didn't care which way. The world outside blurred into gray and white. But even miles away, I could still see in the mirror that faint orange glow far behind me. It wasn't fading. It was following, and when I finally stopped to rest, hours later, I saw a candle sitting on the dashboard. It was small, plain, and burning. The wax was melting now, slowly, steadily, like it was counting down to something I didn't want to understand. I tried to blow it out, but the flame just leaned toward me, flickered once, and whispered, "Remember, you can tell yourself you've moved on, but the past doesn't care. It waits, quietly." A few days after I left Ember Road, I stopped in a small roadside diner about 30 miles out. I needed gas, food, something that didn't smell like ash or fire. The place looked normal enough. Cracked neon sign, dusty windows, that kind of timeless loneliness small towns carry like a disease. Inside, it was half empty. 2 truckers at the counter. A waitress who looked like she hadn't smiled in years. I sat down, ordered coffee, and tried not to think about the candle still burning in my glove compartment. It hadn't gone out. Not once. Even with the lid shut, even after I tried drowning it in water, it stayed lit. A faint orange glow leaking through the cracks at night, pulsing softly, like a heartbeat. When the waitress came back, she set down the cup and froze. "You've been through Ash Hollow?" The words hit me hard. "How'd you know that?" I asked. She just nodded toward my sleeve. I hadn't noticed. My jacket was dusted in gray soot. "You should wash that off," she said quietly. "People around here don't like seeing that color." I tried to laugh it off, but she wasn't joking. There was something in her eyes. Not fear exactly, but memory. I told her I'd just passed through, that I didn't stay long. She nodded slowly, like she'd heard that before. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Did you hear the bells?" I looked up. "What bells?" "The ones from the church," she said. "They say they still ring sometimes, when somebody remembers." I stared at her, not sure if she was teasing me or warning me. "Remembers what?" She hesitated, then said softly, "The fire." The way she said it, like she didn't want to say the word all, made the hairs on my arms stand up. I tried to ask more, but she just shook her head and walked away. When I left the diner, an old man was sitting outside on a bench, smoking. He must have been listening because as I walked past, he said, "You saw the church, didn't you?" I froze. He didn't even look up, just flicked ash from a cigarette and added, "Most folks who do don't talk about it, but you look like you need to." I hesitated, then sat down next to him. His eyes were pale blue, glassy, like smoke had lived in them for years. "What do you know about that place?" I asked. He laughed, a low, wheezing sound. "Too much. Not enough. Depends who you ask." He told me his name was Walter, though everyone used to call him Walt the Bellman. He'd been the one to ring the church bell before the fire, back in '89. "Wasn't a big job," he said. "Just Sundays, funerals, the usual." Then came that summer. The drought, the heat. You could feel the land crack beneath your feet. He said the fire started in the valley, spread too fast to fight. But before anyone even saw the smoke, the bell started ringing on its own. "Middle of the night," he said, loud enough to wake the whole town. I thought it was kids playing around, so I went to check. But when I got there, the rope wasn't moving. The bell just swung, slow, like someone invisible was pulling it. He took a long drag from his cigarette, staring into the distance. That's when the sky lit up. The hills caught first, then the houses, then people. I didn't speak. I could almost smell it again, the burning wood, the melting air. I tried to ring the bell to warn everyone, he said, but it was already ringing. Wouldn't stop. The sound didn't echo like metal anymore. It sounded like screaming. He looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly. I don't remember much after that. Just heat. The church was gone by morning. Only thing standing was the steeple. They found me a week later in the fields, half blind from smoke. I asked how he survived. He just smiled sadly. Did I? We sat in silence. The highway hummed in the distance. Then he said something that chilled me worse than the rest. You know what's funny? It still rings. Not often, just every few years. But only when someone remembers what happened there. What do you mean, remembers? He looked at me like it was obvious. Memory's fuel. The fire burns wherever it's remembered. Keeps it alive. I didn't answer. My chest felt tight, because I had remembered. He kept talking, his voice dropping to a whisper. You ever wonder why nothing grows out there? Not grass, not trees. Just ash. Because it's still burning, boy. Deep down. Still burning. He turned to face me, and his eyes looked darker now. When you dream, do you hear it? I wanted to say no, but I had. Every night since Ash Hollow, that faint tolling sound, slow and distant. I told him that. Walt nodded. Then it knows you. The bell don't just ring for the dead anymore. It rings for the ones who remember them. He leaned closer. When you hear it again, don't answer. Don't look back. Just keep moving. Before I could ask what he meant, he stood and walked away, leaving a trail of grayish behind his boots. I sat there for a while, trying to steady my breathing. Then I heard it, faint, far off. A bell, one low, deep toll that cut straight through the sound of the wind. It couldn't be real. The church was miles behind me, buried in ash. But I heard it again. Another toll, louder. The people in the diner didn't even flinch. It was like I was the only one hearing it. I stood up fast, scanning the horizon. The sound came from the south, from the direction of Ash Hollow. And then my truck radio turned itself on. The same static as before. The same low hum beneath it. But this time I heard words. A whisper between the static. 1989. That's all it said. Over and over. I climbed into the truck. Shaking. The candles still burned on the dashboard. The flame small but steady. The radio kept whispering. 1989, 1989, 1989. I drove without thinking, down back roads, through empty fields, until the sound finally faded. By the time I stopped, it was dark. I could still hear the bell faintly in my ears, even though the world outside was silent. When I opened the glove box, the candle was gone. In its place was a small brass object. Cold, heavy. I picked it up. It was a bell clapper, the piece that swings inside a church bell. Burnt black at the tip. I dropped it instantly. The truck's lights flickered. The engine stuttered, and for a moment, I saw a glow on the horizon, a faint orange shimmer where the sky met the hills. I didn't need to ask what it was. The fire. It was burning again. I don't know how far I drove that night. Maybe 100 miles. Maybe more. But sometime before dawn, I realized something. The bell still echoed faintly behind me. It wasn't getting quieter. It was keeping pace. And I swear, when I looked in the rearview mirror, I could see the faint outline of a steeple rising through the smoke, following me down the highway. Every time I blinked, it got closer. By sunrise, the sound had faded completely, but the smell, that old, sweet, choking smell, stayed in my clothes, my skin, everything. I told myself I'd never go back, never say the name of that town again. But last night, while I was half asleep, I heard the bell ring once more, not from far away this time, from right outside my window. I didn't mean to stay the night in that church. I told myself I'd just rest for an hour or two, get my bearings, and leave before dark. But as the light faded to cracked stained glass, the thought of driving those empty, ash-choked roads again made something inside me seize up. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something quieter, like exhaustion with teeth. So I stayed. The pews were coated in a fine gray dust, and every time I moved, it rose around me like smoke. My flashlight flickered weakly on the altar. The same candles from before were still burning. Steady flames that didn't melt, didn't drip. I tried to blow one out earlier, and it didn't even waver. The air around them was cold. I pulled my jacket tighter and sat in the back row. Outside, the night settled over Ash Hollow, soft and heavy. I couldn't see the sky through the windows anymore, just a haze of dark fog that pressed close against the glass. The silence was a kind I hadn't heard since the fire. Except it wasn't complete silence. There was a sound somewhere deep in the church. A faint crackle like kindling. Every few minutes, it would pop as if it were expanding under heat. I told myself it was old beams settling, whined through the rafters. Anything else. But the air smelled warm, like something faintly burning. I leaned back and tried to rest. My body was worn from the drive, from the walking, from the memories. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes. The orange glow across the hills, the sound of trees screaming as they burned, the last glimpse of our house before the smoke swallowed it whole. I thought I'd forgotten that sound. Turns out, your body remembers even when your mind wants to let go. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes, it was still dark, but not as dark as before. The church was glowing. Not bright, just a low, living pulse. The candles were burning higher now, their flames stretching long and thin, bending toward the doorway. I followed their light with my eyes, and I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Footprints in the ash. Bare feet, leading from the altar to the door and out into the night. The air was warmer too. Too warm. My throat went dry. I tried to stand, but my legs felt heavy, almost numb. The air had that low humming weight, the kind that makes your skin prickle before lightning strikes. That's when I heard it. The bell. One deep, distant ring. Then another. It came from somewhere up the hill, through the fog. Slow, deliberate chimes, like someone was tolling it by hand. The survivor I met earlier had told me the story, how the town's bell rang whenever someone remembered the fire. I'd laughed it off then, told him maybe it was the wind. But now the air inside the church vibrated with each ring, like the sound was traveling through the walls, through me. And underneath the ringing, I heard something else. My name. It wasn't shouted or whispered, just spoken in a calm, even tone, from outside the church. I froze. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Who's there? I called. No answer. Just the next bell. And the smell, stronger now, thick and heavy. That sour sweetness that comes when something organic burns. I grabbed my bag and started toward the door. My flashlight flickered again, and I swear, just for a second, I saw movement in the light. A figure standing in the aisle. I turned the beam directly at it. But there was nothing there, only floating dust, glowing faintly in the air. The candles nearest me flickered for the first time. Then they bent, all of them, at once, their flames pointing toward me like fingers. And then they whispered. I didn't hear words, not at first. It was more like a sound behind my ears, a whispering heat that crawled across my skin. Then slowly, the words formed. Stay warm. The same words my mother used to say when she tucked me in during the winters. The last thing she said before the fire reached the house. Stay warm. I stumbled back, my knees hit the pew. The whisper turned to a low chorus. Dozens of voices, all overlapping, all whispering the same thing. Stay warm, stay warm. The church doors creaked open on their own. The fog outside was glowing orange now. I could see the hill in the distance, the bell tower silhouetted against it, and at its base the fire, crawling through the ash, slow and alive, burning without smoke. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but something about the light, the warmth, pulled at me. It wasn't just fire. It looked like it knew me, like it was reaching for me. The whisper changed, softer now, coaxing. You left us cold. I couldn't breathe. My eyes watered as the air grew hotter. Through the haze, I saw shapes in the fire. Human shapes. Faces that flickered and vanished. My father's hand. My sister's hair. My mother's voice rising through the roar. You left us cold. The candles burst, one by one, sending streams of light into the air that drifted toward the door, toward the fire. And then the bell rang again, loud enough to shake the whole church. I covered my ears. My flashlight died completely. I don't remember running out. I just remember the ground under my feet turning soft, like walking on hot sand. The fog shimmered orange around me, and I could feel the fire moving, not spreading, but following, like it knew where I was going before I did. Stay warm, it whispered again. I reached my truck somehow, though I don't remember seeing it until my hand hit the door handle. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and turned the key. Nothing. The engine was dead. I looked back toward the church. The door was wide open. Inside, the pews glowed red, and something was standing at the altar. Something that looked like a person, but too tall, too thin. Flames crawled up its arms, but didn't consume it. And then I realized it wasn't the fire that was burning. It was the church itself. Every wooden beam, every candle, every cross, all burning without smoke, without sound, just that awful whisper, "Stay warm." The figure took one step toward the doorway, and the flames dimmed around it, like the fire was waiting. That was enough. I ran. I left everything, the truck, the road, even my bag. I just ran down through the ash until my lungs burned worse than the air. When the dawn finally broke, I was standing at the edge of the old highway again. Behind me, Ash Hollow was silent. No smoke, no fire, no bell. Just a pale haze drifting over blackened ground. I waited for hours before I dared to go back for the truck. When I finally did, the church was gone. There wasn't even a foundation left, just a circle of scorched earth. And in the center, a single candle still burning. No wax, no wick, just a flame sitting in the dirt, swaying in the morning breeze. I tried to blow it out. It didn't even move. As I turned to leave, I swear I heard that voice again, faint and close, right behind my ear. "Stay warm." And for a moment, I felt heat on my back, like someone's hand resting there. I haven't slept right since. Sometimes, when the nights are cold and I can smell the smoke and the wind, I still hear the bell ring once. And I know, somewhere, Ash Hollow has remembered me too. It showed up on a Thursday. No return address, no name, just a faded postcard tucked neatly between the bills and coupons in my mailbox. I almost didn't notice it at first. It looked old, like something you find at an antique shop. Corners soft, paper yellowed from age. On the front was a picture of a bridge over still water. A small town rested on the far side. A few houses, a church steeple, maybe a general store. The sky above was gray, but not stormy, just quiet. At the bottom, in faded type, it said, "Greetings from Dunn's Crossing." The name tugged at something in the back of my mind. I'd heard it before, maybe from a headline, maybe a story someone told once. I couldn't remember. I flipped it over. There was no message, just an address, mine, and a stamp that looked like it had been printed decades ago. The ink was smeared, but I could still read the postmark. Dunn's Crossing, 1978. I laughed out loud at first. Thought maybe someone was pulling a prank. A vintage postcard, mailed to me from a town that doesn't even exist anymore. But when I set it on the counter, I couldn't stop staring at it. The bridge, the church, that still water that looked more like a mirror than a river. Something about it felt wrong. That night, I looked it up. Dunn's Crossing, Pennsylvania, a town built in the late 1800s. Population just under 800 before the flood. In 1982, after weeks of heavy rain, the old dam upriver gave out. The whole valley filled with water in less than a day. The bridge, the church, the houses, all gone beneath the flood. Dozens of people died before rescue crews even made it there. The photos online were black and white. Images of rooftops barely poking out above the water. Rescue boats gliding past drowned telephone poles. The kind of pictures that feel too still to be real. I remember reading the caption under one of them. Only the steeple of St. Mary's remains visible when the water is calm. It looked just like the one on my postcard. That should have been the end of it. A weird, creepy coincidence. Maybe someone from my old neighborhood thought it would be funny. But then I noticed something. When I picked the card up again, there was a faint mark on the back. Something that hadn't been there earlier. A thumbprint. Dark, grayish, like soot or dried mud. And next to it, written so faintly I almost missed it, was a single word. Soon. I dropped it immediately. It hit the counter face down, and I just stood there staring at it. Every sound in my house suddenly too loud. The fridge humming, the clock ticking, the faint wind outside brushing against the siding. I thought about throwing it away, but something in me didn't want to. It wasn't curiosity. Exactly. More like a quiet unease that told me I'd regret it if I did. So I left it there. The next morning, it was gone. I tore the kitchen apart looking for it. Checked the trash, the counter, even the floor. Nothing. I live alone, and I hadn't had anyone over. The front door was still locked from the inside. But right when I was about to give up, I saw it. It was back in the mailbox. Same card, same faint thumbprint. Only this time, the picture was different. The same bridge, the same church, but the water level was higher. Half the town was gone now, drowned beneath the surface. I stared at it for a long time. I remember my hands shaking as I flipped it over. This time, there was a line written under the word, soon. When the water is still, they remember. I don't know how long I stood there in the driveway, reading that over and over. The air felt heavy, thick like before a storm. I could hear the faint sound of running water somewhere nearby, even though my street doesn't have a creek or anything. That night, I dreamed of it, of the bridge, of the town, of standing in the middle of that still water and seeing faces beneath the surface. Pale, unmoving, their eyes open but blank. The kind of dream where you don't realize you're dreaming until you wake up gasping, drenched in cold sweat. I sat up in bed and listened. My house was silent again. But underneath that silence, I could hear something faint, like dripping. I followed the sound to the kitchen. The postcard was on the counter again, water pooled beneath it. I picked it up and it was soaked, the image smeared and warped. Only the steeple of the church still visible. The rest was washed away, like the flood had finally taken the town completely. But something was written on it again, darker this time, as if someone had pressed the pen into the paper hard enough to tear it. Do you remember? I dropped it, but before it hit the floor, I heard it, the faint ring of a church bell. Not loud, just distant, echoing through the night air outside my window. I lived miles from the nearest church. I barely slept after that. Every few minutes, I'd hear it again, the bell ringing once, then silence. The next morning, I went back to the mailbox. Empty. I walked to the end of my street, checked the neighbors' boxes, looked under the steps, even checked the ground. Nothing. But as I turned back toward my house, I noticed something glinting in the gutter, a corner of a postcard. I reached down, pulled it out. It was torn, edges frayed, but I recognized it instantly. The picture was of the same bridge, but this time the water was gone. The town was dry again, clean, untouched, like it had never flooded at all. And standing in the middle of the road, small and distant, was a single figure. I brought it closer to my face. It was me. Same jacket, same hair, same way I stand when I don't know what to do with my hands. I dropped the card, heart hammering in my chest. The air around me smelled like rain, but the sky was clear. When I looked back down, the postcard was gone. I ran inside and locked the door. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about it, how it had known my address, how the picture had changed each time. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that maybe the flood stories had gotten in my head. But that night, right before bed, I checked my mailbox again. I don't know why. Maybe part of me wanted proof. Maybe I just needed to know it was over. But when I opened it, there was another card waiting inside. Brand new, dry, clean. The picture showed the bridge again, the one from before the flood. But this time, there were two figures standing on it. One of them was me. The other one, I couldn't make out. It looked like a woman. Her face was turned toward the water, her hand resting on my shoulder. There was no writing this time, only a date in the corner. Dunn's Crossing, October 14th. That's 3 days from now. And here's the thing, I looked it up again. The anniversary of the flood, October 14th, 1982. 43 years to the day. I don't know who's sending them. I don't know how they're getting into my house or my mailbox. But the last few nights, I've started hearing the bell again. Faint at first, then closer. And sometimes, right before it rings, I swear I can smell rainwater. And something else. Wet earth, rot, river silt. Like the kind of smell that comes from something that's been underwater a very, very long time. The drive to Dunn's Reservoir took a little over 2 hours. It shouldn't have felt that long, but every mile past the city made the world quieter. The road curved through forest, and by the time I saw the water, I realized I hadn't passed another car for nearly 40 minutes. The reservoir stretched out like a sheet of gray glass, calm and heavy under a low sky. The trees along the shoreline looked sick, thin branches, pale bark, like they'd been reaching too long for light that never came. I parked by the small general store at the edge of the water. The sign above the door read, "Dunn's Crossing Bait and Goods," in faded red paint. I hadn't expected there to be anything here at all. Inside, it smelled like damp wood and tobacco. A man stood behind the counter, older, gray-bearded, skin brown from years outdoors. He looked up when I walked in, eyes narrowing just a bit. "Not from around here," he said. I shook my head. "Just visiting." I read about the old town, Dunn's Crossing. He didn't answer right away. He just stared, then leaned back in his chair. "Most people don't come out here for that." I found something. "A postcard," I said, "from before the flood." That made him pause. He scratched at his beard, watching me like he was trying to decide whether I was joking. "A postcard," he repeated slowly. "From Dunn's?" I nodded. "Where'd you get it?" I hesitated. "It showed up in my mailbox." He let out a dry laugh, not friendly, not mocking, just hollow. "Then I'd say you've been chosen," he said. "Or remembered." I frowned. Remembered by who? The man didn't answer. He turned and gestured toward the window that looked out across the water. "You see that line out there?" I followed his finger. About 50 yards from shore, there was a faint ridge just below the surface, stretching across the lake like a shadow. "That's the bridge," he said. "The one from your postcard. It shows up when the water's low. Most times it stays hidden, but the drought this summer's been pulling it back up." I stepped closer to the glass. I could see it better now. Stone arches under the water, warped by the rippling surface. "It's still there," I whispered. He nodded. "Whole town's down there. They never cleared it before they flooded the valley. Church, houses, even the graveyard. All of it. They say if the lake ever drops too far, the town will come back." I laughed nervously. "Come back?" "Not the way you're thinking," he said. His eyes didn't leave the water. "It's not about the buildings. It's the people." I didn't know what to say to that. The air in the shop felt colder now, like the conversation itself had opened a door somewhere. Another voice spoke up behind me. "He means the ones that never left." I turned. A woman stood by the shelves, maybe in her 50s, hair tied back, eyes the same washed-out blue as the lake. She was holding a can of soup, but her gaze was fixed on me. She smiled faintly. "You must have gotten one, too." "One what?" I asked. "A postcard." My stomach dropped. "You got one." She nodded slowly. "About 15 years ago. Came from Dunn's Crossing, just like yours. I burned it. Thought that would stop it." She looked down at the can in her hand. "But the dreams never stopped." "What dreams?" I asked. She didn't look at me. The bridge, the faces under the water, the sound of bells. The man behind the counter muttered something under his breath, like he didn't want to hear her. She turned to me again. "If you saw the bridge, don't go near it. Not when the light's fading. That's when they look back." Her words stuck with me, even as I paid for a bottle of water and walked back outside. The air by the reservoir felt thick, humid. The sound of the wind off the water was almost like whispering. I walked down the gravel slope until I reached the shoreline. The bridge was clearer now, its stone arches curving beneath the surface, patches of moss and dark growth clinging to the top. The water around it barely moved. I crouched down, running my fingers along the edge where the soil met the water. It was cold, colder than it should have been. When I looked up again, I saw something, just for a second, a figure, standing in the middle of the bridge, too far to make out clearly. I blinked, and it was gone. The ripples that followed were small but deliberate, like someone had stepped into the water. I backed away. The wind shifted, carrying a smell I hadn't noticed before, old, earthy, metallic, like wet stone. By the time I got back to my car, The woman from the store was standing outside, watching me from a distance. She called out softly, "If it starts raining, don't listen to it." Her voice cracked when she said it. I didn't know what she meant, but I nodded anyway, got in and drove away. Halfway down the road, I pulled over at a lookout point that faced the whole valley. From there, I could see the reservoir spread out for miles, calm and gray in the clouds. I took the postcard from my bag and compared it. The same angle, the same view, except in mine, the bridge wasn't under the water. It was dry. The town beyond it was still alive. I looked again at the real thing, and I realized the water was lower than it had been when I first arrived. Maybe it was my imagination, but I could swear I saw rooftops just under the surface. I stood there a long time, watching the lake, listening to the faint hum of the wind through the trees. And that's when I heard it, the faint ring of a bell. One low, echoing chime, then another. It came from across the water, from the direction of the church steeple in the postcard. I froze. There was no church anymore. Nothing but water. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. The bell rang again, softer now, like it was underwater. Then the water rippled. Slowly, a current spread outward from the center of the lake. The surface shimmered, bending the reflection of the sky. I thought I saw a movement beneath it. Pale shapes, drifting upward. Hands. I blinked hard. The wind picked up, breaking the surface again. When I looked back, the shapes were gone. I turned to leave, heart pounding. But before I got back in the car, I noticed something on the ground near my feet. It was another postcard, wet, edges torn, half covered in dirt. I picked it up carefully. The picture was the same, the bridge, but this time there was water dripping from the ink, as if the image itself was bleeding through the paper. I flipped it over. There was no stamp, no address, only a single sentence written in shaky letters. The lake remembers what the town forgets. A drop of water fell onto the card. I thought it was rain, but when I looked up, the sky was clear. I turned back toward the reservoir. The surface was perfectly still again, like glass, and somewhere in that silence, I thought I heard something just beneath it. Faint, rhythmic, steady. Footsteps, crossing the bridge beneath the lake. You said, the last postcard came on a Sunday. No mail was supposed to come that day, but there it was, sitting in my mailbox, damp with fog, the ink bleeding just slightly at the edges. Same handwriting, same faded print. Dunn's Crossing. Only this time there was something new, a return address. It was written in shaky black ink at the top corner, almost as if someone had pressed too hard. The words barely legible, but I knew them the moment I saw them. It was my old address, the house I grew up in. I must have stood there for a full minute, staring at it, my breath visible in the cold morning air. The longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. My childhood home had been gone for years, swallowed by the flood when they built the reservoir, but the postcard was recent. The stamp mark was dated last week. I went inside, shut the door, and locked it without thinking. The postcard felt heavier now, like it didn't belong in this world. The picture on the front was of the lake, calm, silver, and endless, but near the bottom, almost hidden by the water's reflection, I could make out something that looked like rooftops, tilted, half submerged. I turned it over again. The return address was written clearly this time. 21 Meadow Lane, Dunn's Crossing. That was my house. That was our house. When the valley was flooded, my parents told me it was gone. They never let me go back to see it before it was covered. They said it was better that way, better to remember it how it was. But now, the lake was lower than ever. I'd seen it last week, when the arches of the old bridge had started breaking through the surface. I guess part of me already knew what I was going to do. That night, I packed a flashlight, a small crowbar, and the postcards, all three of them, and drove out to Dunn's Reservoir. The road there felt different this time. Narrower, darker. The forest pressed close on both sides, the trees bending in like they were listening. When I parked at the overlook, I could already see the pale outline of the bridge under the moonlight. The water was even lower now. I could see more of the town beneath it. Roofs, maybe a church steeple. And somewhere below all that, my house. The night air stung my face as I walked down to the shore. The ground was soft and uneven, parts of it still slick with mud. I followed what looked like an old path, bits of broken concrete, moss-covered railings, until I reached the edge of the bridge. The stones were wet, slick, but solid under my feet. I took a deep breath and stepped onto it. It was strange, walking across something that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Each step echoed faintly, the sound vanishing into the open dark. I kept the flashlight low, the beam cutting across the mist that clung to the surface of the water. The further I went, the more I could see beneath it outlines of buildings, cars, even a street sign leaning sideways. When I reached the middle of the bridge, I stopped. There was a smell in the air, like rust, like the inside of old pipes. I looked down into the water. It was clear, clearer than I'd ever seen it. And there it was, the roof of my house. The light from my flashlight glimmered on the broken shingles, the outline of the chimney. The water line had dropped just enough that the top half of the house was visible. Windows dark and empty. Front porch collapsed inward. I could almost see my old bedroom window. It didn't look real, more like a memory someone had drawn in the water. And then I saw something else. A faint light flickering inside the house. Orange, soft, like candlelight. My first thought was that someone else was out there. Maybe the locals, the ones who talked about the town coming back. But the light wasn't moving. It was steady, waiting. I stepped off the bridge and down the embankment, the mud sucking at my boots with every step. The closer I got, the colder the air became, sharp, unnatural. The water reached my knees by the time I got close enough to touch the side of the house. The wood felt soft, swollen from years underwater. The light was coming from inside the living room, the same room where my parents used to sit at night, the one that smelled like coffee and pine cleaner. I leaned closer to the window. The glass was cracked, but still whole. I wiped away a thin layer of algae, shining the flashlight inside. There was a candle, just one, sitting on the table. And beside it, something else, a postcard. My hand started to shake. I could see the faint outline of writing on it, but the glass and the water distorted it. I don't remember making a decision. I just remember pushing against the frame, hard enough that it finally cracked. Water rushed into the gap, flooding the room even more. I reached inside, my arm trembling, fingers brushing against the table. The wood was soft, disintegrating under my touch. I grabbed the postcard and pulled it free. It was wet, but the ink hadn't washed away yet. I turned it over under the beam of my flashlight. No stamp this time, no handwriting, except for a single line, "Welcome home." The water around me rippled. I froze. The sound came from behind me, something moving through the shallows. Slow, deliberate steps. I turned, scanning the dark, but the mist was thick now, rolling across the water like breath. I could see shapes in it, faint, tall, human. At first, I thought it was just reflections, but reflections don't move toward you. I stumbled backward until I felt the wall of the house against my back. The shapes were closer now, and then I heard it, the same sound from before, distant but clear. Bells. They weren't coming from above the water this time. They were coming from below. The sound echoed to the valley, muffled and wet, like it was trapped under glass. The water around my legs began to move, gentle at first, then stronger, swirling like something was rising beneath me. I dropped the postcard. When I looked down, the light from the house had changed. It wasn't orange anymore. It was white, blinding. I stumbled back toward the bridge, nearly falling as I climbed up the slope. My chest felt tight, my breath sharp and ragged. When I reached the middle, I turned back. The water had gone still again. The house, the candle, the light, all gone. Only darkness remained. But as I stood there, trying to calm down, I noticed something glinting near my feet. A small brass key, old, rusted. Attached to it by a loop of black string was a tag. It read, 21 Meadow Lane. I picked it up without thinking, my fingers shaking. The key was cold, too cold, like it had just been pulled from deep water. I didn't go home that night. I sat in my car by the roadside until dawn, staring at the key in my hand, replaying everything in my head. When the sun finally came up, I looked toward the reservoir one last time. The water had risen overnight. The bridge was gone again, buried under the surface like it had never existed. But I knew it was still there. I knew the house was still there. And somewhere beneath all that water, someone had sent me a message. The postcards had stopped arriving. But every night since then, I've heard the faint sound of dripping water in my apartment. Steady, rhythmic, like footsteps crossing a wet floor. Sometimes when I wake up, there's a damp circle on the nightstand. And the brass key, it's always wet. I've driven across a lot of forgotten roads in my life. But there's one that still crawls into my mind when I close my eyes. Highway 42, somewhere between nowhere and nowhere else. The kind of place where the pavement cracks like old skin and the wind carries dust that smells like rust and burnt grass. I was on assignment that week, photographing abandoned structures for a magazine that barely paid me enough for gas. It was supposed to be easy, old barns, dead motels, things falling apart in quiet corners of the country. I liked that kind of silence. It made sense to me. But that day, I missed a turn. And that mistake took me to Winton. It started with mile marker 23. The green sign stood crooked at the edge of the highway, half buried in weeds. I remember slowing down to photograph it. Something about the way it leaned, the way it looked forgotten even by time itself. When I checked my GPS, the screen had frozen. No signal. I figured I'd just keep going a few miles and turn back once I saw another exit. But I never did. The road narrowed, bending through hills that looked dry and hollow. The air had a strange weight to it, like humidity but colder, thicker. I rolled down the window and heard nothing but my own tires. Not even insects. Not even birds. That's when I saw the sign. White paint peeling. Welcome to Winton, EST 1904. I don't remember the name from any map. It wasn't on my GPS. Still, I pulled over. It felt photographable, like one of those towns people forget until they disappear completely. The main street ran straight through the valley, lined with maybe a dozen buildings. Old storefronts, a gas station with glassless windows, a diner with its awning half torn. Everything coated in that same beige dust. I got out of the car and immediately noticed how still it was. The kind of stillness that presses against your skin. When I lifted my camera, the sound of the shutter echoed down the empty street. 1 photo. 2. 3. The sound traveled too far, like the town was hollow inside. I wandered past the barbershop, the pole outside still faintly red and blue, but the door was nailed shut. I peered inside through a crack in the boards. Chairs were overturned, hair clippings still on the floor. It looked like everyone had just stood up one day and walked away. I kept walking. My boots left clear tracks in the dust. Nobody else's were there. No dogs, no bikes, no tire marks. Just me. At the end of the street stood a small post office. The flagpole out front had no flag, just a bit of frayed string fluttering in the wind. When I stepped inside, the smell hit me, dry paper and something faintly sweet, like rotted fruit. A row of mailboxes lined the far wall. Most of them were open, a few still locked. I ran my hand over one, box 23, and something about that number made my stomach twist. I don't know why, but I whispered, "Anybody here?" The sound bounced around the room and came back to me softer, like an echo that didn't belong to my voice. I raised my camera again, just instinct, and snapped a picture of the mailboxes. When the flash went off, something flickered in the corner of my eye. A shadow, maybe a reflection. I turned. Nothing there. Just an old counter with a rusted bell and a few envelopes scattered on the floor. I told myself it was just the light, maybe my nerves. I'd been driving too long, running on gas station coffee and dry air. But then I heard something, a faint sound outside. Not footsteps, more like a scrape. I walked to the door and looked out. Down the street, near the gas station, I saw movement. A figure standing still in the sunlight. At first, I thought it was a mannequin. It didn't move, didn't even seem real, but it was facing me. I raised my camera slowly and zoomed in. The viewfinder showed a man, or what looked like one, wearing old work clothes, dusty, stiff. His eyes were dark, unfocused. I clicked the shutter, and in that split second of the flash, he vanished. I blinked, lowered the camera. Gone. The road was empty again. My heart started to pound. I wanted to call someone, but I had no service, no signal, nothing. I told myself maybe I'd imagined it. The heat, the exhaustion. It was probably some kind of scarecrow or leftover statue. But I knew what I saw. Still, I walked back toward the car. My boots kicked up small clouds of dust, and each step seemed to get heavier. When I reached the car, I noticed something strange. My tire tracks were gone. The dirt road behind me, the one I'd clearly driven it on, was smooth, unmarked. I stared at it for a long time. Then I climbed in, locked the doors, and turned the key. The engine sputtered. Once, twice, then nothing. That's when I noticed something in the mirror. In the back window, faint but visible, was a reflection. Someone was standing behind the car. I froze. My fingers hovered over the keys. The reflection didn't move, but the shape was clearer now. A man, tall, with something like a hat. Same one I'd seen on the street. I turned around fast. Nothing. I got out again, my breath catching. The air felt thicker now, like the town had closed in. Every sound was gone. Even my footsteps seemed quieter, like the dirt was swallowing them. I checked behind the car. No footprints. No shadow. Just silence. I walked a few feet toward the middle of the street. The sun had dipped lower now, painting everything in dull orange. That's when I saw it. Something I hadn't noticed before. At the end of the street, where the pavement stopped, there was another sign. Smaller, bent, barely hanging on one post. I walked closer, wiping away the dirt to read it. The letters were faint, but still there, leaving Winton below it, in faded black paint. Someone had written a single word. Stay. I stepped back. My throat felt dry. That's when I heard the bell. A single, sharp ring, like the kind you hear in an old shop when someone walks through the door. It came from behind me, from the post office. I turned, but the door I'd left open was now shut. The blinds in the window had been pulled down. Something inside moved, just enough to cast a shadow against the fabric. I ran. Didn't think, didn't look back. I ran straight for the car, jumped in, and turned the key again. This time it started. I floored the gas, dirt spitting from the tires as I tore down the road. The speedometer climbed, the town shrinking behind me in the mirror. When I finally reached the highway again, I didn't stop, not for miles. I only slowed when I saw another green sign, mile marker 23, that same crooked sign I'd passed hours before. But this time there was something new beneath it, a wooden post with a small square nailed to it. It was a photograph. I pulled over, heart hammering, and stepped out. The picture was pinned there with a rusted nail. It was mine, one of the photos I'd taken earlier that day. The post office. Only this time, there was someone standing inside the doorway, and I swear it looked like me. I left that road behind, but I've never been able to find it again. The GPS works fine now, but every time I try to search Winton, it gives me nothing. No results. No history. Still, sometimes when I'm driving at night, I'll see that same crooked sign flash by in the corner of my headlights, mile marker 23, just long enough for me to wonder if I missed a turn again. And every time I do, I swear I hear a faint sound in the distance. A bell, ringing once, waiting. You said, I didn't mean to go back to Winton. But a week later, I found myself there again, in a way. It started in my darkroom. I'd taken hundreds of shots that day. The bridge, the gas station, the old post office. I wasn't even sure why I developed them. I told myself it was just curiosity, a photographer's habit. But deep down, I think I wanted proof that it had all been real. The chemicals filled the air with that sharp, metallic smell. I'd always liked it. The quiet ritual of developing film, the red light, the slow reveal. It was comforting, familiar. I hung the first strip of negatives on the line and leaned closer. At first, everything looked normal. The cracked pavement, the leaning sign, the empty street. But when I looked again, Something made my stomach twist, eye in the corner one frame. Near the gas station, there was a shadow, a shape. It wasn't clear. Maybe a person, maybe just a trick of the light. But I remember that spot. I remembered being alone. I blinked, trying to convince myself I was seeing things. I moved on to the next frame. That's when I saw them. Not one, not two, dozens. Shapes in the windows, lining the buildings on both sides of the street. Silhouettes, standing perfectly still. Watching that, I dropped the photo tray, splashing chemicals across the floor. My mind raced. I couldn't have missed that. I was there for hours, and not once did I see anyone. The wind didn't even move the curtains in those windows that I pulled the negatives closer to the light, heart pounding. The figures were clearer now. Human outlines faded, distorted. Some pressed close to the glass, some farther back in shadows. And in every single picture, they were facing the same direction, toward me. I took a step back, trying to breathe. The air in the room felt thick, like the heat had been turned up without me noticing. My hands were shaking so bad that I smudged one of the prints. It left a dark streak across the faces. I turned toward the table where I'd set my camera bag. It was open. The lens cap was off, and my camera was pointing toward the glass window in front of me. The window looked out into my apartment, just my reflection under the red light. But for some reason, it felt wrong. I could see myself. But the longer I stared, the less it looked like me. The posture was off. The head tilted a little too far. And behind me, in the reflection, there were other shapes. I turned fast. No one was there. When I looked back at the glass, they were gone. I tried to calm myself down, told myself it was fatigue, stress, something logical. Maybe the film had been double exposed. Maybe my eyes were just playing tricks on me. But then I noticed something else. A faint sound. It was coming from inside the drying cabinet. A soft tapping, like fingernails on glass. I hesitated before opening it. My heartbeat was so loud, I could barely hear anything else. Inside, the prints hung in neat rows, glistening wet under dim light. But one of them, the one I'd taken to the post office, was different now. It had changed. The photo I remembered taking showed the building empty, doors closed. But in this one, the door was open, and standing in the doorway was a figure, a tall one, wearing something like a hat. The same figure I'd seen that day. The one who vanished when I took his picture. I stepped back until my shoulders hit the wall. Something was wrong. The air felt colder now. The red light flickered once. Barely. And I swear, in that blink of darkness, I saw movement in the glass again. A shape behind me. I turned. Nothing. I tried to focus on the sound of my breathing. Slow. Careful. But the tapping came again, this time from the window. I froze. My dark room was on the second floor. There was no balcony, no fire escape, nothing. Still, the tapping continued. Slow, deliberate, like someone tracing a circle on the glass with their fingertip. I forced myself to look. At first, I saw nothing but my reflection. Then, faintly, the outline of something behind it. A hand, pressed against the glass from the outside. I staggered back, nearly knocking over the chemical trays. The tapping stopped. The hand stayed for a few seconds longer, just a pale print against the window, then faded. I didn't move for what felt like a full minute. My whole body buzzed, like my nerves were trying to escape my skin. When I finally looked at the photos again, the one at the post office had changed again. The door was still open, but now there were more people inside. Crowded shapes, blurry faces turned toward the camera. And in the foreground near the corner was me, camera in hand, standing in the same place I had been that day. But my expression, the version of me in that picture, wasn't right. The mouth was open, like mid-scream. That was when I realized the photograph had been taken after I'd left Winton. The car wasn't there in the background anymore. And the light, it looked different, more recent. I wanted to tear the photo apart, but I couldn't. My hands wouldn't move. Every time I blinked, the image seemed to shift slightly. I could swear the people in the windows were closer now. I turned off the enlarger lamp. thinking maybe it was a light messing with the exposure. The room went almost black, just a faint red glow remaining. That's when I saw the reflection again. Dozens of them, not in the photograph this time, in the glass wall. Silhouettes, faint, still, they were standing behind me. My body locked up. I could see their shapes, some tall, some hunched, one right beside my shoulder. I didn't breathe, didn't blink. I just watched them. The reflection didn't move for a long time. Then one of them, the one closest to me, tilted its head, slowly, almost curious. And as it did, every other shadow tilted too, perfectly synchronized. That's when I ran. I pushed through the door so hard it slammed against the wall, the sound echoing down the hallway. I didn't stop to turn off the lights or grab my camera. I ran until I was outside, gasping in the cold night air. The street was quiet, empty, but as I stood there trying to steady my breath, I noticed something odd. The windows of my apartment, all of them, were glowing faintly red from the darkroom light I'd left on, and in each one I could see them, the silhouettes, standing there, watching. I didn't go back inside that night. I stayed in my car until the sun came up, staring at those windows until the light finally washed them away. When I went back in the morning, the photos were still there, lined up, dry, perfectly normal again. No shadows, no figures. I almost convinced myself it had all been in my head. But that afternoon, when I opened my laptop, there was a new folder on my desktop. I didn't create it. I don't even use that program anymore. The folder was titled Winton_Developed. Inside were the same photos I'd taken, but they were different again. Every one of them showed the same scene. A man standing in the middle of a dusty road, camera hanging from his neck, surrounded by empty buildings. But in this version, the one that shouldn't exist, the man's eyes were wide open, and reflected in the glass of every window behind him were dozens of faces, all looking straight at me. I wasn't supposed to be there. After what happened with the photos, I promised myself I'd never go back. But promises don't mean much when something keeps pulling you in. That night, I dreamed of the road again, mile marker 23. The same cracked asphalt, the same quiet. Only this time, I could see figures standing in the distance, waiting. When I woke up, I was already driving. No plan, no destination, just drifting, the same way I had before. The map said I was somewhere near the old county line, close to Winton. I don't even remember deciding to take that turn. It just happened. My hands moved, and before I knew it, I was back on that narrow stretch of road with the faded signs and the leaning telephone poles. It was afternoon when I saw him, a man walking along the side of the road, carrying a small duffel bag. He looked like he'd been walking for days, clothes dusty, skin burned by the sun. I slowed down, rolled down my window, and called out, "You need a ride?" He hesitated before answering, then nodded once. When he got in, the air filled with the smell of dirt and cigarettes. He didn't say much at first, just sat there, staring out the windshield, like he wasn't really seeing the road at all. After a few minutes, he asked, "You heading to Winton?" I froze a little. I hadn't told him where I was going. "Just passing through," I said. He smiled, or maybe it was more like a twitch. Nobody just passes through Winton. Something in his voice made my stomach tighten. I asked, "You from there?" He nodded slowly. "Used to be." Then, after a pause, "A lot of folks used to be." We drove in silence for a while. The radio didn't work, just static. The road curved and narrowed, the trees leaning close on both sides, like they were trying to shut us in. Finally, he spoke again. "You know they evacuated it, right? Back in '92. I didn't." He looked surprised. "Yeah, they said it was some kind of outbreak. Quarantine." But he trailed off, running his fingers through his beard. That's not the whole story. I glanced at him. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Just stared out the window as we passed the old welcome sign, the one half buried in weeds. The paint was peeling now, but I could still read it. "Winton, founded 1889. They told us to leave," he said. "Said it wasn't safe anymore. Folks packed up in a hurry. But some people didn't. Some didn't believe it was real. Others didn't want to go. He turned toward me then, his eyes dull and pale gray. Not everyone left, friend. Some stayed behind, and they never really went away. I felt my throat tighten. What happened to them? He let out a breath, almost like a laugh. Depends on who you ask. The government said it was a virus. The church said it was punishment. The rest of us, he shook his head. We just stopped asking. We reached the edge of town not long after. The air felt thicker there, heavier, like humidity, but colder. The buildings looked worse than before. Some had collapsed. Others stood empty with black windows and vines growing up the sides. The main street was cracked and overgrown. He asked me to stop near the diner. I pulled over. He opened the door, but before getting out, he turned to me and said, "You're a photographer, ain't you?" I nodded slowly. He smiled again. I figured. You got that look, like you're always seeing something nobody else does. Then he leaned closer. His voice dropped, almost a whisper. "If you're taking pictures here, don't look too long at the windows. That's where they stay." I tried to ask him what he meant, but he was already walking away, heading down a narrow alley that disappeared behind the old post office. I sat there for a minute, watching him until he was gone. Then I looked up at the diner sign, Harper's Eatery. Its letters rusted and broken. For some reason, I got out of the car. Inside, it smelled like dust and rain. The booths were still there, cracked red vinyl. Dishes sat on the tables like people had just left them. The clock above the counter had stopped at 11:47. I pulled out my camera and took a few shots. When I looked through the viewfinder, the light seemed strange, dimmer than it should have been. The walls looked darker too, like something had stained them from the inside out. Then I saw movement outside the window. I lowered the camera. Nothing there, just empty street. But the hairs on my neck were standing straight up. I stepped closer to the glass and looked out. The air outside shimmered slightly, heat waves maybe. And for a second, I could have sworn I saw shapes in the reflection. Not behind me, inside the reflection itself. People, dozens of them, standing where no one was. Their outlines flickered faintly, like they were made of smoke. I blinked and they were gone. When I turned around, one of the stools at the counter had moved. Just a few inches, enough to notice. I told myself I was imagining it, that the floor was uneven or I'd bumped something. But I didn't take another photo. I just left. Outside, the road was empty again. No sign of the drifter. No sound except the wind and the faint creak of metal somewhere in the distance. I started walking toward the car when I heard footsteps behind me. Soft, slow. I turned and froze. It was him, the drifter. But he looked different now. Paler, his clothes darker, wet maybe, like he'd walked through water. He was standing in the middle of the street, staring at me. "You shouldn't have stayed," he said. His voice was lower now. "Hollow, I didn't," I said. "I was just..." He shook his head. "Once you see him, it don't matter. You're part of it." I felt a rush of cold run through me. Part of what? He tilted his head slightly. The same motion I'd seen in the reflections back in my darkroom. "Locals," he said. "The ones who never left." I blinked, and in that moment, he was gone. Just gone. The street was empty again. No footprints. No sound. I got in my car and drove. I didn't care where. I just needed to get out. The road twisted behind me. And soon the town was gone, swallowed by trees. I didn't look back until I reached the highway. In the rear view mirror, the sky above Winton looked darker than the rest, like a bruise spreading across the horizon. When I got home that night, I dumped my camera bag onto the table and just stared at it. I didn't want to touch it. Didn't want to see whatever might have followed me. But eventually, curiosity won. I connected the camera to my laptop and opened the files. Every photo looked normal. The diner, the road, the sign, except one. In the photo of the street, the one where I'd first seen the drifter, there were people in the background, not blurry, not faded, clear, a crowd of them, standing in front of the diner, faces blank, eyes black and hollow, and in the center of them was the drifter, Smiling, I closed the laptop, heart pounding. But even after I turned it off, the reflection on the screen didn't fade. It showed the street again, and behind the crowd, I could see a new figure standing at the edge of the road, camera in hand, looking right back at me. It started with a single frame, one photo. That's all it took to break the thin wall between what I believed was real and whatever waited on the other side. After what happened in Winton, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see those faces, the hollow-eyed crowd behind me, the drifter, the street, the diner that shouldn't still be standing. I thought maybe it was all in my head. So I did what I always do when my mind starts eating itself alive. I worked. I set up my camera in my studio. The small one-room apartment I turned into a dark room. I told myself I'd take some simple portraits, focus on something real, something grounded. But the first time I looked through the viewfinder, I felt it, that strange, sinking pull again, like I was being watched through it. I tried to ignore it, adjusted the lens, lined up the shot. Click. The sound of the shutter echoed too long, like it didn't stop when it should have. Later, when I developed the film, most of the photos looked fine, except one. In the background, barely visible through my reflection in the glass door, there was someone standing outside. Same jacket, same hair, same angle of the head. Me. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. Maybe I'd taken a double exposure by mistake. But the more I looked, the less that made sense. The other me wasn't holding a camera. His hands were down at his sides. His eyes, my eyes, were fixed right on mine. And there was something off about the expression. I remember leaning in close to the print, squinting, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But the longer I stared, the more the air in that room seemed to thicken. It felt like standing too close to a mirror that doesn't move when you do. I tore the photo in half and threw it away, told myself that was it. But later that night, when I went to take the trash out, the photo was back on the table, perfectly smooth, no tears. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, staring at it, that copy of me standing in the fog outside my window. At some point, I heard something shift outside, a slow scrape, like a shoe against concrete. Then another. I went to the window and looked down. There was no one there, but the reflection in the glass. He stood in the street below, hands still at his sides, staring up. I blinked, stepped back, heart pounding. When I looked again, the street was empty. That was the first time I realized the glass wasn't just reflecting me. It was watching me. I tried covering the mirrors in the apartment, every single one, even the windows. Didn't matter. Every surface, the microwave door, the picture frame, even the lens of my camera, I could feel him somewhere behind it, like he was waiting for me to look again. I thought maybe I was losing it. That's what I told myself when I saw my own face in a puddle near the curb the next morning, smiling when I wasn't. But it wasn't madness. Not exactly. It was something else. The night before, I developed the last roll of film from Winton. I hadn't planned to look at it. I'd promised myself I wouldn't. But after everything that happened, I needed to know. So I turned off the lights, switched on the red bulb, and started developing. The negatives showed the street again, the diner, the houses, the empty road. But in the very last frame, the camera wasn't pointing at the town anymore. It was pointing at me. I don't remember taking it. I don't remember turning the lens around. But there I was, standing on that same cracked asphalt. When I pressed the viewfinder, behind me, the same crowd of shadowed figures. And in the far distance, behind them, a shape, faint but distinct, leaning out from a dark window. It was my face again, smiling. I dropped the photo. My breath caught in my throat. It felt like I'd been photographed from both sides at once, like the camera had captured me and whatever was taking the picture from the other side. That's when I realized I hadn't taken a photo. Something else had. After that, things started to change. Every time I lifted my camera, it would hum a faint static buzz, almost like feedback. Sometimes the lens would adjust on its own, focusing on a spot I had aimed at. And sometimes when I pressed a shutter, it wouldn't click right away. It would wait, like it was choosing the moment for me. One night, I woke up to that same click, the shutter sound. My camera was on the desk across the room. The strap swung slightly, like someone had just let it go. I got up, turned on the light, checked the photos. The last one wasn't me asleep in bed. It was a window, taken from outside. That's when I called the only person who still picked up my number. A journalist I used to work with, Evan. He owed me a favor. I told him everything. The town, the drifter, the photos. He didn't believe me at first, but I sent him a few shots, not the bad ones, just enough to make him curious. He agreed to come by the next morning. I didn't make it that long. Around 3 a.m., I heard something whispering near the window. Not words, just breathing, slow, careful, almost synchronized with mine. When I looked up, I saw a faint reflection in the glass. Not clear, not bright, just there. And this time, he wasn't standing still. He was moving. I could see his head tilting, his hand lifting, pressing against the inside of the glass from his side. When I stepped closer, his palm matched mine, perfectly aligned to the cold surface. And I realized the glass wasn't reflecting anymore. It was thinning. The longer I stared, the more the space between us seemed to fade, like the light from my side was leaking into his, and his world, if you could even call it that, wasn't dark. It was lit wrong. Too white, too empty. I could see the same apartment behind him, the same furniture, but reversed. And in that other room, another camera was set up on a tripod, aimed right at him. He smiled, slow and stiff, like a puppet learning how. And then he raised his own camera and took a picture. The flash blinded me. When my vision came back, the glass was empty again. The only sound left was a faint click of the printer. On my desk, the photo tray was sliding out, even though I hadn't touched anything. The new photo was still wet when I picked it up. It showed me standing in front of the window, but my back was turned. And behind me, through the glass, the other me was grinning, hand raised in a wave. Evan showed up an hour later. The door was open, the light still on. He called my name a few times, then saw the camera sitting on the tripod. The lens was aimed at the doorway. He said later that he felt it too, that strange heaviness in the air, that hum. He told the police he took one step into the room, then heard the shutter click again. When they developed the photo from that roll, I was standing behind him, smiling, and in the faint reflection on the window glass, the other me, the one from the other side, had finally lowered his camera, waiting for the next shot. You said, I waited 3 days before touching the last roll of film. 3 days of pretending that everything was fine. I told myself the faces, the reflections, even that thing in the glass, none of it was real, just tricks of the mind. Fatigue, stress. But that last roll sat there on the edge of my desk, wrapped in its little black canister, like it was alive, like it was waiting for me to give in. And I did. It was a quiet night, the kind where every sound feels like it's pressing right against your ear. The hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock, even your own breathing. I turned off the lights, set up the tray, the chemicals, the red lamp, the same routine I'd done 1,000 times. But this time I was careful. I told myself I'd develop it clean. Just one roll. Just to know. When the first image began to appear in the tray, I felt my stomach twist. It was me. I was standing in front of my own window. The photo was taken from behind, from inside the room, the same angle every single one of the others had been taken from. But this one was sharper. The details were too perfect. The grain of the wall, the crease in my shirt, the faint outline of my reflection in the glass. I flipped to the next frame. Same shot, same me, different time of night. I could tell by the light outside. Sometimes darker, sometimes almost morning, but always me, always facing that same window. Frame after frame. It was like watching myself stand there night after night, unmoving. It didn't make sense. I'd only taken 1 or 2 photos, not a whole sequence. The roll had 24 exposures. Every single one was of me. By the 15th frame, something else started changing. The reflection. It wasn't matching me anymore. While I stood still, the reflection began to move. A head tilt, a shift in the shoulders, a faint blur, like it was stepping closer to the glass. By the 18th photo, its hand was lifted. By the 19th, its face was pressed against the window pane. I remember gripping the edge of the table, so hard my fingers went numb. I didn't want to see the rest, but I couldn't stop. The 20th frame, the reflection's mouth was open now, not wide, just enough to look like it was whispering. And in the next one, its eyes were gone. Just two pale holes where they should have been. I dropped the print into the tray, splashing the developer across the counter. I wanted to stop. God, I wanted to. But there were still a few frames left. So I kept going. The 22nd photo, the reflection was gone. The window was black. And the me in the photo, the one standing in front of it, had his head turned toward the camera. Just slightly. Just enough to show that he wasn't supposed to be still anymore. I didn't remember doing that. I flipped to the next one with shaking hands. The 23rd frame. The me in the picture was gone now. The window was open. Curtains swaying, faint light leaking in. I looked around the room, half expecting to see that same curtain moving behind me. But everything was still. Too still. There was only one photo left. I hesitated before pulling it out. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it might tear through my chest. I lifted the last piece of film, holding it under the red light, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't a photo. Not really. It was a negative. A pure reversal. Colors inverted, light and shadow flipped. But what was inside that image didn't belong to this world. I was there again, in front of the window. But everything was backward. The room, the lamp, the furniture. Like the picture had been taken from the other side of the glass. And behind me, outside that reverse world, stood a dark figure. Just a shape at first. But the longer I looked, the clearer it became. It was wearing my clothes, holding my camera, and in its other hand, it was holding a piece of film, holding this exact negative up to the glass, just like I was doing now. I swear to you, it moved. Not much, just the faintest tilt of the head, like it was checking if I was paying attention. And then it smiled. Not a grin, not human, more like something folding open, like skin pulling apart to reveal teeth underneath. The air in the dark room got heavy. The chemical smell turned sour, and the red light flickered. That's when I realized there was another light, a pale glow coming from the window. I turned slowly. The curtains were breathing. That's the only way I can describe it. Expanding and collapsing, as if the night itself was inhaling through the glass. I tried to tell myself it was wind, but the window was closed, and then the glass warped. The reflection of the red lamp bent inward, like something pressing against it from the outside, like someone trying to see in. The bulb flickered again, and for a split second, I saw it. A face, my face, pressed against the glass, eyes wide, lips parted, not moving, not breathing. Just there, I stumbled back, hit the counter, and the tray spilled. The liquid splashed across the floor, washing over the photo paper. The light went out. The room fell into that thick kind of dark, where even your heartbeat sounds distant. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just stood there, waiting for something to touch me. When I finally turned the light back on, everything looked the same. The negative was gone. The curtains were still. The window, just a window. But the film canister was empty, and there was a new photo in the tray. It was still wet when I picked it up. Fresh, warm. It showed the same window. Same curtain, same red glow from the lamp. But the me in the picture was looking out, not in, and through the glass, in the darkness beyond, another me stood in the street, holding a camera up to his eye. He'd taken the photo from outside. I dropped it and backed away, shaking, whispering no, over and over. But then I noticed something else. The film strip on the counter. The edge of it was still developing, the image spreading slowly, line by line. And right before the light faded, new words appeared on the bottom margin of the frame. Not printed, not scratched, written in the same handwriting as mine. It said, "Now it's your turn." That's when I heard the click. Not from the dark room, from the hallway. The sound of a shutter, soft, careful, patient, followed by the faint whir of film advancing. And before I could even look up, I realized the light from the window wasn't shining into the room anymore. It was shining out. It started as just another assignment. Nothing strange. Nothing that should have gone the way it did. I was working for the regional census office. The kind of job people forget exists. Rows of files, outdated records, quiet offices that smell like paper and old coffee. My supervisor called me in one morning, holding a thin manila folder. Said it was a clerical anomaly. That's what they always say when something doesn't make sense. But they don't want to admit it. The folder was labeled Winton County. Population, 1,421. That number should have been impossible, because Winton was supposed to be abandoned. I remembered the name. My father used to talk about it when I was a kid. Said there'd been a fire or a chemical spill or maybe a flood. Nobody was sure. But whatever it was, the town was cleared out decades ago. Except now, the database showed a full list of residents. Names, addresses, even birthdays. The entries were dated from just 2 months ago. Probably a data duplication. My boss said, tapping his pen on the folder, just go check it out. Verify, clear the record, and close the case. I should have said no, but I didn't. The drive to Winton took most of the day. The road got narrower the farther I went, until it turned to cracked asphalt, then to gravel, then to nothing at all. Just dirt cutting through miles of dead trees, the kind that looked gray even in daylight. The GPS lost signal about an hour before I reached the town line. I drove the rest of the way by memory, following an old map printed in the corner of the file. The paper felt soft, like it had been handled too many times. The first sign I saw said Winton, EST 1894, in fading white paint. Someone had drawn a line through it in red spray paint, and underneath, in big uneven letters, was written, "Don't count US." I almost turned back then. Almost. But curiosity is a hard thing to fight, especially when you've been told all your life that ghosts are just paperwork errors. The road opened into what used to be Main Street. A few stores lined the way. A diner, a post office, something that looked like a pharmacy. The windows were covered in grime, but through the dirt I could see things inside. Tables, chairs, even plates. Everything still in place, like people had just left. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of dust, and something else, something sweet, like fruit that had been left out too long. I parked near what looked like the town hall. The front steps were cracked, the paint on the door peeling in strips. But when I pushed it open, the hinges didn't creak. It swung too easily, like it had been oiled recently. Inside, the building looked almost preserved. Paper scattered across desks. Coffee mugs, half filled and crusted over. A wall clock frozen at 2:37. I walked through the aisles of desks, calling out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice echoed in a way that made it sound like someone else was answering back. There was a faint humming sound coming from somewhere deeper inside, the kind of low electric buzz you get from old wiring, but there shouldn't have been power. The place had no connection to the grid anymore. I followed the noise into a small office marked census records. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was cooler. On the wall was a massive board filled with pinned photographs, each labeled with names and dates. I recognized the layout. It was almost identical to the one we used back at headquarters. But these names, they matched the ones in my file. All 1,421 of them. I stepped closer, running my finger along the rows. Some of the photos were old, yellowed with time, but others were recent, freshly printed. I stopped at one near the bottom. The photo showed a man standing on a porch, squinting at the camera. His name was written below in neat black pen, Daniel Holt, age 34, verified April 17th. The verification date caught my eye. That was just last month. But according to the report, no one had been here since the 90s. My heart started to thud. I flipped open one of the logbooks on the desk. Each page listed population verification, with check marks next to addresses. But there was something wrong with the handwriting. It wasn't from one person. Every few lines, the pen stroke changed, Some neat, some hurried, some shaky like from an old hand. Different people had been keeping this record, and at the bottom of the most recent page, dated just 2 weeks ago, was a single entry that froze me where I stood. Field verification officer. My name, it was my handwriting, my signature. The ink still looked wet. I stared at it, not breathing. I hadn't been here before. I knew that. Then the humming stopped. The silence that followed was so thick it made my ears ring. I felt the pressure change, like the air in the room had shifted, and then, from somewhere down the hall, came the sound of footsteps. Not loud, not heavy, just steady, slow, measured, like someone walking barefoot on tile. I turned toward the doorway, trying to speak, but nothing came out. The sound grew closer. The rhythm was wrong, not human, not quite. It would stop for a second, then start again, like someone remembering how to walk. I backed up until my legs hit the desk. Papers scattered across the floor. When the footsteps stopped, I could see a shadow under the doorframe. Not a person. Something taller. Too still. And then, just as suddenly as it came, it was gone. The hum flickered back to life. I could hear the clock ticking again, faintly. I don't know how long I stood there before I finally forced myself to move. I grabbed the folder, the logbook, anything I could, and ran out into the street. The air outside felt colder. The sky had gone gray, though the sun was still up. As I passed the diner, I saw something through the window. A man sitting in a booth. Back turned, head tilted slightly, like he was listening. I slowed down. My heart was in my throat. He looked familiar. Same shirt, same short dark hair. When he shifted, I saw the side of his face. It was Daniel Holt, the man from the photo. His skin looked pale, waxy. His eyes were open, staring straight ahead at nothing. And next to him, sitting across the booth, was another figure, smaller, maybe a child. I couldn't make out the face, but I saw movement. The child lifted something small and black. A camera. The shutter clicked. I don't remember getting back to the car. I don't remember starting the engine or driving down that endless road out of Winton. But I do remember looking in the rear view mirror. The town wasn't fading behind me like it should have. It stayed there the same distance away, like I wasn't really moving at all. And in that mirror, just before the road turned dark, I saw the diner again. The booth, two shapes sitting there, and a third one now. Someone sitting beside them. Someone wearing my clothes. When I finally made it back to the city, I filed my report. I didn't mention what I saw. I just marked it unverified. Population 0. But a week later, I checked the national database again, just to see. The Winton County record had updated. Population 1,422. And listed at the bottom, under verified residents, was my name. I didn't sleep much after coming back from Winton. Even now, I'm not sure if I ever really left that place. I kept telling myself I imagined it all. The photos, the names, the sound of footsteps in that building. I told myself it was exhaustion, that maybe I was losing it after years of staring at numbers and forms. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The real trouble started when I opened the ledger. It was the one I grabbed from the desk inside the Winton Town Hall. The one with my own name already written inside. I'd thrown it in the trunk when I drove off, meaning to turn it over to the office as evidence of the anomaly. But I couldn't bring myself to hand it in. Something about it felt personal. The first few pages were what you'd expect. Handwritten population lists, signatures, and dates that went back decades. But when I turned to the newest pages, I noticed the ink was darker, fresher. The handwriting changed halfway down, becoming sharper, almost precise, like someone was trying too hard to imitate neatness. At first, the entries matched what I remember from the digital records. Winton County. Population 1,421. Each line had a name, an address, and a date of verification. But as I kept reading, something started to feel wrong. The names, they weren't strangers. They were familiar. I saw my old high school teacher, Mrs. Bell, my co-worker from the census office, Ryan Keller. Even my next-door neighbor, Jasmine. Each one listed under the same location, Hollow Creek. That wasn't possible. I flipped through faster, my pulse rising. The more pages I turned, the more the names made sense. People I'd known all my life, each written carefully as though someone had been keeping track of my world. Some names had notes beside them, little scribbles in smaller writing. Confirmed at residence. Returned after dusk. Awaiting transfer. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the words. It felt like reading a list of the dead. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, that maybe someone had used common names, that it wasn't actually my people. But when I reached the next page, the lie fell apart. My mother's name was there, her exact birth date, her old address, not where she lives now, but where we stayed when I was 10 before my father disappeared. And next to her name was a date written in fresh black ink. Verified, October 2nd, 2025. That was 2 days ago. I stared at it so long my vision blurred. I picked up my phone and called her. She answered right away, cheerful as always, but her voice, it didn't sound right. There was a long pause before she spoke, like she was trying to remember how. Sweetheart, you sound far away. I'm fine, I said, forcing the words. Just checking in. Where are you right now? Another pause. Then, almost casually, she said, oh, just home, near Hollow Creek. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told her that name. I hadn't told anyone. But she said it like it was normal, like it was always true. After that, I didn't say much. I made an excuse and hung up. Then I just sat there in the dark, staring at the ledger lying open on my desk. I couldn't look away from the next page, because that's when I saw my own name again. But this time, it wasn't listed under Winton. It was under Hollow Creek, and below it, in faint gray pencil, someone had added, returned, awaiting confirmation. That night, I dreamed about water, a black, still lake stretching farther than I could see, people standing waist deep in it, facing away from me, unmoving. The surface was glassy, reflecting the sky like a mirror, except the sky above wasn't the same as the one I knew. It was inverted. Clouds drifted below the horizon, like smoke sinking instead of rising. In the middle of the lake stood a sign, white paint peeling. It said, welcome to Hollow Creek. When I woke up, my pillow was damp. For a second, I thought I'd been sweating. But the smell, it wasn't sweat. It was earthy mineral like lake water. The ledger was still open on the desk, but the page had changed. The ink looked smudged, like someone had written over in a hurry. Next to my name, new handwriting had appeared. Thinner, shakier. It said, verification in progress. I slammed it shut. I don't scare easily, but something about that phrase made me feel like I was being counted, like something was keeping track of me, updating the moment I looked away. I decided to go into the office early that morning. I needed to show someone, tell someone, maybe Ryan. He'd worked there for years, and he knew the data systems better than anyone. When I walked into the building, the lights were still flickering on, and the air smelled faintly of bleach. Ryan's cubicle was empty, but his computer was still on, and on his monitor was the same ledger. Scanned, uploaded. Only this version had more names. It listed every employee in the regional census office. All of them. The date column for each one said the same thing. Verified. Hollow Creek. Except mine. Mine just said, pending. I remember standing there, staring at the screen, my reflection faint in the glass. And for the first time, I noticed something behind me in that reflection. A shape like a person standing just over my shoulder. But when I turned, there was no one there. Still, the air behind me felt cold, like someone had just stepped away. I shut off the monitor and left. I don't even remember locking up. By the time I got home, the world felt smaller. My apartment, too quiet, too hollow. I sat on the floor with the ledger in front of me, flipping to the last page. There were new entries, ones I hadn't seen before, people from my past, my best friend from college, my father's old coworker, names that didn't belong on any census record, names that no one should have remembered. And at the very bottom, there was a line that hadn't been there before. written in that same uneven handwriting. When the count reaches 0, the town wakes. I didn't understand what it meant. Not then. But I noticed something else. The earlier pages were fading, like the ink was being erased one name at a time. By evening, half of them were gone. I checked the database again online, Winton's record, Hollow Creek's record, and found nothing. The systems didn't even recognize those towns anymore. The files were gone. And yet the ledger kept updating, as if someone or something was writing from the other side. That night, I heard tapping from the hallway. 3 knocks. Slow. Even. I opened the door and found nothing. But when I looked down, I saw a thin white envelope on the floor. No address. No stamp. Just my name. Inside was a small slip of paper torn from the ledger. My name written again, but now with one final word beside it. Counted. I don't remember dropping it, but it fluttered out of my hand, landing face up on the carpet. And when I looked at the wall, I realized there were water stains creeping upward from the floorboards. Dark, spreading patterns that almost looked like fingerprints. The smell of the lake was stronger now. That same mineral taste in the air. The same damp chill that clung to my clothes after the dream. I don't think Hollow Creek is a place you can visit. I think it's a place that visits you. And once it knows your name, it doesn't stop counting. I didn't sleep for 2 days after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that hum, that layered sound of 100 lost frequencies blending into one. And in my dreams, I kept seeing towns, drowned streets, houses with lights still burning behind wet glass, and faces, always watching. Eventually, I smashed the transmitter, ripped out the cables, cut the wires, and burned the tapes. For a few days, it worked. The silence was complete again. But then last night, my neighbor knocked on my door. He said he picked up a weird broadcast on his truck radio. My voice, saying things I've never said. When I asked what it sounded like, he said, "You were reading names, hundreds of them." I didn't tell him this, but I think I know what he heard. The names from the old call logs. The ones that never existed. The ones who never left. Now, every night at 12:03, I hear it again. Faint static coming from the walls, from the air vents, from the hum of the fridge. It's like the signals move beyond wires and waves. It's in everything. And sometimes when I listen close, I swear I can hear my own voice in it. Still broadcasting. Still calling out to no one. And sometimes something calls back.